Chapter 10. Palestone Castle. In an effort to put a stop to the bombardment on the doors, soldiers spilled out as the door to the castle burst open.
"Just as we thought,"
one soldier said.
"Moonwitch soldiers are trying to break in. They...
His words trailed off as he took in the sight in front of him. Gerald was middle-aged, and had been in the Queen's Guard for most of his life. He thought he'd seen everything. Until now. Ahead of him, a stranger in a Red Fern uniform held the head of a Moonwitch soldier. Blood was just about everywhere, and every place in between. What in abysses had happened out here?
"Who are you?"
Gerald called, somehow finding his voice. It was the voice he usually used when commanding the soldiers in his unit. Strong, powerful, and not to be messed with. It was a voice that should be obeyed without question or hesitation. It was just unfortunate that the man holding the decapitated, crushed head didn't seem impressed by it at all. He just remained where he was, staring up at the head he held above his own and letting the blood from it drop onto him.
"I don't recognise him, sir,"
someone said. It was the voice of one of Gerald's men, but he didn't want to turn away from the stranger for even one moment to see who.
"I think he stole that armour, sir." "Who are you?"
Gerald tried again. An excellent question, the stranger said. He let go of the mangled head and let it drop to his feet. Turning to face Gerald, the stranger smiled. Unable to control himself, Gerald gasped when he saw the stranger's eyes and teeth. This was no normal man.
"What the fuck?"
another of Gerald's soldiers said at his side.
"Surround him!"
Gerald gave the command, and watched as his soldiers complied. They seemed reluctant, and he couldn't blame them, but soon enough the stranger was surrounded by a ring of armoured soldiers, each with a weapon of some kind pointing in his direction.
"Do not move,"
Gerald said to the stranger.
"If you move, we'll be forced to execute you. Is that clear?"
The stranger continued to wear that hideous grin. Rushed and heavy footsteps came from inside the castle. Several members of the Knights of the Green Fire appeared in the doorway, their armour displaying their order's revered symbol, a black sword resting on a green flame. The Knights of the Green Fire were held in high esteem in Red Fern, and some even went as far as to worship them. Queen Elspeth blessed them with special privilege and immense power. Gerald had seen some of those knights in action on several occasions, and their speed and strength was something to behold. He'd been awestruck watching them fight.
"This man is to be taken into the castle immediately," one of the Knights of the Green Fire said.
"On whose order?" a soldier asked. Gerald winced when he realised the man had neglected to add a "sir" to the end of that question. By sheer luck, the knight didn't seem to notice, or was probably occupied by other more pressing thoughts.
"By royal order,"
the knight replied, before turning to the other knights he'd arrived with.
"Take our guest to his room."
The other knights nodded and moved towards the stranger. "What if I don't want to go?" the stranger asked.
"It's for your own good."
The knight stepped aside, so the others could get past with their guest.
"No harm will come to you if you join us inside."
He held out his arm to beckon the stranger in. "Oh, I wasn't worried about harm coming to me," the stranger replied, as he kicked the decapitated head away and strolled alongside the knights. While he spoke, he also peeled the borrowed face away and let it drop to the ground. It landed with a splat, and several of the soldiers surrounding the stranger gasped. "Don't worry. I'll do as you wish. But not because I fear you. I want to make that clear. I have nothing to fear from you." "Then why do as they say?" One of Gerald's soldiers seemed to have remembered they could talk. "I've always wanted to see the inside of the castle. My mother says it's a sight to behold," the stranger said simply as he followed the knights inside. The thick wooden doors were closed behind them, leaving Gerald's unit stuck outside. "What now, sir?" the talkative soldier asked. "We follow the original objective." Gerald walked in front of his troops and started to regain the composure that had started to slip away the longer he'd been in the presence of the stranger. "We must rid Red Fern of this Moonwitch scum." Gerald and his troop headed into battle. The memory of the stranger burned forever into their minds. Chapter 11. A Time to Run. Mildred had never been the sort of person to run for any reason. If she ever had to be anywhere by a certain time, she always made sure she left as early as possible. Sometimes that meant she arrived at her destination far earlier than she needed to be there. But she'd rather be early than be late and have to run. As far as Mildred was concerned, running just wasn't natural. But running was what she was doing now, and it was feeling like a very natural reaction to the scene she'd just witnessed. There hadn't been time to mourn Stanley after his life was cut short by that floating axe. That would have to come later, when the danger was gone. Instead of weeping next to her husband's body, Mildred had spun on a hill, grabbed the nearest object, which happened to be a frying pan, ran through the small house and out through the front door. She gripped the frying pan as she imagined knights might grip their swords, and readied herself to face whatever the night had to offer. The night outside was full of violence, with people fighting just about everywhere. Some of those faces she knew. Some she didn't. She could only hope that Angus was still out there somewhere. She couldn't face losing both her husband and her son in one single night. Her lungs betrayed her, and she had to stop to catch her breath at the end of a particularly dark street. Perhaps running was not so natural after all. Anything that led you to believe you were dying had to be bad for you. Reminding herself how to breathe, she gulped down as much air as her struggling body would let her. Around her, it was like abysses had opened up in Red Fern. Every few moments, the violence in the air would be amplified, and Mildred couldn't help but think that soon there would be nothing else. In amongst the clanging steel, the smashes and the screams, Mildred heard a high-pitched laugh. The laugh was so out of place that it caught her attention immediately. Trying to look everywhere at once, Mildred searched for the owner of the strange giggle. She didn't have to look far. Even in the dark, she could see the floating axe. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice struggling with exertion. "Don't come any closer. You've made a terrible mistake."
"And why is that?"
The strange voice and the floating axe came closer. "My son's a soldier!" she all but screamed. If this had been a normal night, someone may have come to her aid. But this night was not normal. Everyone else was too busy to even look in her direction. They all had their own battles to fight. Unhurried, the axe continued to bob along the gloomy street, heading towards her.
"Oh, I know that. I've met young Angus. Lovely chap."
With that, the axe swung towards Mildred's face. She raised her frying pan and tried to bat it away. The weapons met with a deafening clang, causing her ears to ring. Somehow, the frying pan had survived the attack, coming away with only a dent. To Mildred's disappointment and complete lack of surprise, the axe was completely unharmed. But the axe had to be held by something, didn't it? Trying to ignore the weapon, she aimed her frying pan a little lower. There was a satisfying thunk as it made contact with whatever was down there. The owner of the strange voice and the stranger giggled, muttered something incomprehensible, but it seemed pissed off, and that gave Mildred immense satisfaction. Face frozen in a deranged grin, she swung the frying pan at the same spot again. Only this time, it didn't make contact. This time, her opponent was ready. The axe moved far faster than she could swing the frying pan, cutting through the handle with relative ease. The pan clattered to the ground, singing the song of Mildred's defeat. Panicked, she threw the tiny scrap of handle that remained in her hand at her adversary. It bounced harmlessly off whatever was there, and then dropped to the ground by her feet. Mildred watched it fall.
"You've got some fight in you, I'll give you that,"
the voice said. As she heard the words, a mouth started to form out of thin air. It was a vile, obscene mouth, full of jagged teeth and a worm-like tongue. Bit by bit, other parts of the face became visible. There was a long, crooked green nose, sinister yellow eyes, green, scaled skin, large, pointed ears. If Mildred didn't know better, she'd say she was up against a goblin. But that was ridiculous. "This can't be," she said. "You don't exist." The creature, the goblin, now fully visible, looked down at its body, pretending to examine itself.
I dunno,
it said.
I look pretty real to me.
Before there could be any further discussion on the subject, the goblin raised its axe and swung it at Mildred's head. Even though she knew she didn't possess the speed or the agility of someone like her son, she tried to duck out of the way and avoid its deadly blade. For a moment, she thought she'd been successful. For a second, it felt like she'd avoided certain death. No pain swamped her senses. But then reality crashed in, and her head dropped to the ground and rolled towards the goblin's feet. "What just happened?" she asked. Maybe this was a dream. Goblins didn't exist, and even if they did, Mildred shouldn't be able to ask questions if she didn't have a head. Even so, that head did look remarkably like her. If she didn't know better, she'd say it was her. But she did know better. Didn't she?
Bloody hell,
the goblin said, as it looked from the decapitated head and back towards Mildred.
Looks like it's a good night for things that shouldn't exist.
What makes you say that? She asked.
Well, I'm a goblin, and you reckon I shouldn't be here?
The goblin started to move around her, looking up at her as if she was a rare creature no one had ever seen before.
And you're a spirit.
A spirit?
Yeah, a spirit. Or a ghost if you prefer.
So I'm dead then? The weight of the revelation felt almost too much to bear.
Obviously. That is your head next to my toes, ain't it? You can't do much living without a head. Although, I've seen plenty of you human folk get along just fine without much in the brain department. So, you never know.
The goblin laughed its high-pitched giggle at that. Mildred did not find any of what it was saying funny. "Stop your laughing. It's rude," she said, taking on the tone she used when Angus was small and he'd been misbehaving. "Why did you kill me? Why did you kill Stanley? We'd never done anything to you. I didn't even know you existed until tonight." The goblin scratched its chin and thought, and then stood the axe on the ground and rested its arms against it, propping its little body up. How could something so small cause so much carnage?
Well, it's nothing personal. I just had a job to do. And, unfortunately for you, you and your husband were it.
A job? You killed me for a job? She asked.
In this case, yes. Sometimes I kill for food, but this particular killing was sanctioned by the Queen herself.
The Queen wanted me dead?
Again, it ain't personal. She just got herself a new pet, and she doesn't need him having any ties to his old life. He's something new now anyway. It wouldn't make sense for him to come back here.
You're talking about Angus? There wasn't anyone else the creature could be referring to. Angus was all she had now.
Exactly,
the goblin replied.
You should be proud. Your boy's gonna do great things. He's a creep now. There aren't many of those around, I can tell you that for nothing.
A what?
A creep. If you're not going to pay attention, then I'm done with this conversation.
But what's a creep? She asked. Even dead, she found talking to this goblin tiresome.
He's special. He can see all monsters. He can sense stuff about them. Or at least he will, once someone shows him the ropes.
The goblin spoke as if all this was obvious, and Mildred was an idiot for not even suspecting any of it. I should go to him, make sure he's okay, Mildred said, wondering how ghosts moved around.
I wouldn't recommend that,
the goblin said. Then I'll haunt you then, teach you to just go around killing people.
I wouldn't recommend that either.
The goblin straightened up and looked around as if it was expecting someone to be listening in on their conversation.
Your boy isn't the Queen's only pet. She has many. One of them is what's known as a ghost collector. So I'd make yourself scarce before they find you. You wouldn't want to be kept in a jar for all eternity, would you?
So what should I do?
Leave Red Fern. Hang out in the woods. There's plenty of ghosts out there.
Why doesn't this ghost collector just grab some of those? She asked. The goblin shrugged.
Ain't my business to know. All I know is there ain't any ghosts in Red Fern. But there's more than a handful of them in the woods outside. Probably loads of them throughout the rest of Venari too. Who knows? I don't count them. Ain't my job to do that.
A bell sounded somewhere close by. The sound was unfamiliar, but it filled Mildred with a sense of profound dread.
You'd best get a move on,
the goblin said.
That collector's on their way.
With great reluctance, Mildred took the murderous goblin's advice and fled. She raced by and through, fighting soldiers and villagers, and through the open gates. Once in the shelter of the woodland, she made a vow. She'd return to Red Fern when the time was right. She'd see her son again. Chapter 12. A new start. Vimalc's eyelids felt like they'd been glued together. She tried to move her hand to rub them, but something was wrong. Her hand refused to move. Feeling panic start to rise, she tried to move her other arm. That one refused to move as well. Her legs failed to respond as if they conspired against her too. Had she finally succumbed to the wound the young soldier had given her? Was this what death was like? Through sheer force of will, she managed to get her eyes open. Stone walls, loaded with expensive-looking tapestries, lit up by torches, surrounded her. A couple of particularly ugly gargoyles stared down in her direction. It all looked familiar, but she'd never seen it from this angle. Usually, she was standing upright and able to move her limbs without putting any thought into it. Now she appeared to be laying down. Had she been saved? Vague snippets of a conversation tickled at her memory. Why had she been brought here? There was a small infirmary in Palestone Castle, but it wasn't for the use of people like her. It was for the Queen's favourites. Her pets. Uneven footsteps sounded from somewhere close by, and Vimalc tried to turn her head. Movement was still impossible, so she had to wait for the owner of the footsteps to appear in her line of sight. Someone came into view, and to her relief, she recognised them as one of the Queen's scholars. She'd never had much reason to speak to the scholars, but she'd often made a point of greeting them as she saw them scurrying around the castle. This one was the only gnome on the Queen's staff. A strange little chap who almost seemed to hop around rather than walk anywhere. Vimalc couldn't remember his name, but she knew many referred to him as Hoppity behind his back. She wondered if he knew about the nickname.
Ah,
he said as he bent over her.
I see you're awake.
He gave her a soft, comforting smile, and Vimalc couldn't help but want to smile back.
You probably have plenty of questions, but for now, the best thing to do is rest. When you're feeling up to it, you can give your new body a try.
My new body? She asked, her voice sounding strange and somewhat echoey.
Ah, right. I've probably said too much. I thought you knew.
The gnome was getting flustered.
Probably best to just go back to sleep, and then someone else will be with you.
Tell me what's going on, Vimalc demanded, putting as much authority into her new unnatural voice as possible. The gnome's fingers twisted in his beard, and his eyes shot to the open door and then back to Vimalc.
I really don't think I'm the person to do this. I'm a scholar. You need a healer or someone who knows to, talk to people.
You're talking to me right now. Vimalc's patience was already wearing thin. Tell me what's going on.
You were hurt,
the gnome began, resigned to what he had to do.
Wiley helped as much as she could. She gave you the witch's blood. That stuff usually does the trick, but, well, she was a little too late. Your body was, spit it out! My body was what? Well, it was pretty much dead. Your head was almost severed. Do you remember that?
It's not something that's easy to forget, she replied. Especially when it was done by one of your own soldiers, she thought. And witch's blood? The thoughts spun wildly in her mind. Vimelk had been privy to many a conversation about witch's blood, but she never really paid much attention to it. While she dealt with real-life battles and strategies, the abilities of witch's blood seemed like a fantasy. A fantasy that created monsters. Yes, quite. The gnome fiddled with his beard a little more while he chose his next words. So, Wiley took your head. She took my head? What about the rest of me? I didn't ask. I didn't think to, really. It wasn't my concern. I presume the rest of you's still out there somewhere, probably wherever you fell. Vimelk couldn't help but think the gnome's bedside manner left a lot to be desired. But she didn't interrupt him again. Whatever information he was going to give her was going to be unpleasant, and Vimelk preferred to get those kind of conversations over and done with as soon as possible. So yes, Wiley brought your head to me. She'd already given you the witch's blood, so that was working its magic. All you needed was her body. As luck would have it, I'd been working on a little project, and Wiley thought it would be just the thing. What have you done to me? It's probably better if you see for yourself. Without waiting for her to say anything else, the gnome reached over and picked her up, placing her in an upright position. Her height didn't change all that much, but her head didn't fall over. It's going to take some getting used to. You do have extra legs now, but you should be able to move around. Extra legs? She asked. Yes, my research has been on spiders. They're the Queen's favourite. There was a hint of pride in the gnome's voice. You've put my head on some spider's body. Anger started to rise inside Vimelk. Of course not, don't be silly. I made you a brand new body. It just happens to look like a spider's body. It's where I got the idea, you see. It moves through a complex system of cogs and a fair bit of magic. In fact, I used a lot of the magic science in this one. I'd say it's one of my greatest works. I can't wait to see it in action. I can't wait to see you in action. Vimelk looked down and saw copper-coloured metal legs. She tried to move one and, to her surprise, the leg obeyed her. There you go, the gnome said, full of pride and excitement. You'll get the hang of it in no time at all. You made this body for me. I did indeed. The smile on the gnome's face was ridiculously wide now. Then why didn't you just make me a human body? Why did it have to be a spider? The gnome shrugged. The Queen likes spiders. His voice was quiet, and the look on his face suggested he was a little surprised that Vimelk wasn't overjoyed with his work. It probably hadn't even occurred to him that he could have made a more human-looking body. But what am I supposed to do with a tiny spider body? I don't know. It's up to you. You can climb walls, stand on the ceiling. Perhaps Queen Elspeth plans for you to spy for her. Other than that, I know she wants you to be the head of the military. The head of the military? Are you joking? What? No, the gnome became flustered. Oh, I didn't mean to offend. With that, he hopped away, moving as quickly as possible. Vimelk tried her new legs again. This time, the movements didn't feel quite so unnatural. Maybe she could live with this. Chapter 13. The Perfect Treat. Using the axe, Pigby chopped into Mildred's body, helping himself to the meat and organs inside. The slick morsels glistened in the moonlight, and the goblin's stomach growled with delight. Pigby may have killed Mildred and Stanley as part of a job, but there was no point in letting good food go to waste. After eating his fill, the goblin hummed a happy little tune and grabbed Mildred's decapitated head by the hair and swung it back and forth as he made his way to the meeting spot to see Wiley. The brains lurking inside that skull would be the perfect treat once all the night's dark deeds were done. Although the night was busy, no one seemed to notice the severed head floating around apparently by itself. The number of soldiers wearing Moonwitch colours whose corpses lined the streets suggested Red Fern was winning. That was no surprise. The Queen always made sure her side was the winning one. Most within Red Fern's walls knew that fact well. It just appeared the rest of Venari was a little slow to catch up.
They soon will,
the goblin thought. It would be a lesson paid for in blood, and Pigby could only hope to be involved. The goblin found a spot overlooking the castle's door and waited for Wiley. Mildred's head hung in his hand, tempting him with every passing second. A little taster of brain wouldn't hurt, would it? After all, who knew how long Wiley was going to be? She could be out performing her work on the streets of Red Fern all night. Not caring that anyone looking in his direction would see a floating head, Pigby lifted his prize so it was eye level. In death, Mildred's face looked slack and somewhat inhuman. Her new waxy pallor was almost enough to put the goblin off his snack. Given the choice, Pigby preferred either a fresh kill or someone still living to chomp on. There was something about living fear that was just so delicious. But beggars can't be choosers, so Pigby prepared to suck Mildred's brains out of her nose. "You better not be doing what I think you're doing." Wiley's voice disturbed the goblin from his snack. "You know I can't stand to watch that. It turns my stomach."
What? You do vile things too?
Pigby couldn't help but feel a little offended. "Yes, but not as vile as that. And very rarely with an audience." Wiley took a spot next to the goblin and leant against the wall. There was blood on her clothing, and she looked like she could take a nap for a week and still be tired. For once, she wasn't wearing her plague mask, so the full extent of her exhaustion, and her own set of jagged, monstrous teeth, could be seen.
Busy night?
Pigby asked, lowering his prize. The snack would need to wait until later. "Yes, but a successful one," Wiley said. "The Queen will be pleased."
Angus is behaving himself then.
"Yes. He drank the full vial of witch's blood as planned. But that's not all," Wiley said, making sure she had her companion's full attention.
No.
"The Queen got herself 2 new pets this evening. Good old Fimelk's new look is really quite something." Wiley smiled. The Queen would be very happy indeed. If the Queen was happy, life for those in Red Fern was more likely to be good. Or at least slightly less painful. Pigby smiled too. A smile that, at that moment, no one else could see but Wiley. "I trust all was done on your end." She looked down at the head in Pigby's hands.
Of course,
the goblin replied.
You can always trust a goblin when dark work needs doing. There's naught left for the lad to go back to now. His old life is well and truly gone. Almost. Something strange did happen.
The goblin wasn't sure if this should be mentioned to anyone, but the words were out before they could be stopped. "Yes?" Wiley raised an eyebrow.
I off the lad's dad, no problem. But there was an issue with the mother.
Pigby twisted Mildred's hair nervously. "In what way? Obviously she's dead. You're holding the woman's head."
Yeah, she's definitely dead. It's just that, she's,
Wiley sighed and rolled her eyes. "Spit it out, will you?"
Fine. She's a ghost,
the goblin said, relieved. It felt like a weight had been lifted.
I told her to bugger off to the woods, and that seems to be where she disappeared to.
"There's no problem then," Wiley said.
But what if she comes back?
"The collector will get her. That's what the collector does, most of the time." Worry started to cross Wiley's face. Mildred's hair was now close to cutting off the circulation in the goblin's fingers.
What if she dodges the collector? It wouldn't be the first time. She could get to Angus. She could tell him.
"The truth?" Wiley asked. "I see the problem. But there's not much we can do about it now. I'll see if I can find a way of killing spirits, and then we'll go hunting. I'm not even sure we can kill a spirit, but I'll see what I can do. I'll also make sure the collector knows there's a rogue ghost on the loose. We'll cover all bases that way."
I suppose her telling young Angus the truth wouldn't be so bad anyway,
the goblin said, starting to relax.
He's one of us now.
"One of us or not, I wouldn't want to piss him off. Not now I know what he'll become," Wiley said, as Pigby looked at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. "He's more than one of us. More than a creep." He'll be one of her most prized pets, able to see all monsters, able to kill all monsters, and practically invincible himself.
Bugger,
Pigby said. Wiley nodded. Bugger indeed.
We'd better get ghost hunting then.
The goblin looked down at the head in his hands.
You caused me now to put trouble. I'm going to enjoy eating your brains,
he thought. Angus had been led to a lavish suite of rooms, which the Knights of the Green Fire said now belonged to him. He planned to use the money he'd got from the Moon Witch raid to buy a reasonably sized house in a nice part of town. But this went beyond anything he could ever imagine. Everything looked like it was fit for a queen, and since it was all in Pale Stone Castle, that made a lot of sense. He felt like he was sullying the well-crafted furniture and exquisite paintings and tapestries just by occupying the same space as them. Still wearing his blood-splattered armour and clothing, he dropped onto the bed to test it out. It was like laying on a cloud. This couldn't all be for him, could it? There must be some kind of catch. Footsteps outside the door alerted him to someone else's presence, and, forgetting his newly acquired strength, Angus jumped off the bed as if scared to cause offence to whoever was coming. Just as he heard the soft knock on the door, Angus looked at the bed behind him. The blankets were now ruffled and stained with mud, blood, and other fluids, but there wasn't much he could do about it now. He could always apologise or deny all knowledge. Deciding he'd probably do the latter, Angus called whoever it was in.
Hello, sir,
a gnome said as he opened the door. He wore a huge, welcoming smile, and all but skipped into the room.
I trust all is well. Are the rooms to your liking? Queen Elspeth would like you to be comfortable.
The Queen knows I'm here? Angus asked, shocked.
Oh yes, she's very excited to have you.
The gnome had a quick look at the bed behind Angus as he spoke, but he didn't say anything about the mess.
You're very important to the Queen. She knows of your, changes, and she has an interesting proposition for you.
Angus tensed. Here was the catch. The Queen didn't hand out propositions, she gave orders. Whatever this was, he'd have no choice but to follow it through.
You saw the monsters outside, yes?
The gnome asked, but he seemed to already know the answer. Angus just nodded in response.
Wonderful. You're one of the very few who will be able to see every kind of monster. You're truly magnificent. Queen Elspeth will train you, and you'll learn what it takes to make each monster tick. And when you meet monsters on your travels, you can use that information to the Queen's best advantage.
My travels? Around Red Fern?
Oh no, you'll be travelling far and wide. I'm really quite jealous. The Queen's already started calling you the one who walks. It has quite a ring to it, doesn't it? There's a nice new little village called Oakbury that she'd like you to visit. They've got a bit of a demon problem, so after you've finished your training, you can pop by and sort things out.
How long will I be gone?
Well, you won't be gone all the time, and once you get out there, I think you'll enjoy yourself. Of course, you'll need to do some training soon, but I think you'll do very well there. Very well indeed.
The gnome's nerves forced the words out of his mouth almost faster than Angus could listen. Okay, I'll do it, Angus said, not that he had any choice in the matter.
Oh, that is good news. Queen Elspeth will be so happy.
There is one thing, though, Angus said, wondering how much he could get away with. But if he was as special as the gnome claimed, he may have some leverage. What about my parents? Could I move them into the castle? Or even just a better house in Red Fern?
Oh, your parents,
the gnome said, the smile vanishing.
I take it you haven't heard. I'm so sorry to tell you, but they perished in the attack. Moon Witch soldiers dragged them from their home. Or so I hear. We caught a number of prisoners, though, so you'll be able to exact some form of revenge.
Right, Angus said, heartbroken and unsure of what to say. Even in his changed state, grief pulled heavily at him. He coughed to mask a sob before speaking again. I guess I'll start my training then.
I think that's for the best,
the strange little gnome replied. Was that pity in his eyes? Could it have been sympathy?
I'll take you to meet Queen Elspeth now.
Angus followed the gnome as he left the room and hopped down a multitude of corridors. With each step, Angus planned his vengeance. Those responsible for the deaths of his parents would pay. The end of the beginning. This has been Creep, written and narrated by Lou Yardley. Need more Angus? Read Banished. Read Banished already? Check out Everfrost. Want a free Venari short story? Go and read or listen to Snuff Fairies. Red Fern and its inhabitants will appear in the upcoming Rise of the Fall saga. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening to the whole thing. I feel like you deserve some kind of medal. If you like what you heard and you would like a hardback copy or a paperback copy of the book, check out the links down below. I've also got other books that you might like to read that are set in the same world. There's Banished, which is like cool demons and stuff and features our good friend Angus. And there's also Everfrost, which is set 16 years after Banished. So please go check those out. I'm in the process of writing another couple of stories. So the first will be another short story / novella, as it's turning out, which will be set between Everfrost and the new trilogy I'm writing now. And then I'll be on to the next trilogy. So that's exciting. So if you like what you've heard, please like and subscribe. That would be awesome. If you'd like to buy some books, check out the links down below. I've also got merch like t-shirts and bags and all that kind of good stuff down below. Thank you!